Was it just me, or did Minnesota's head coach PJ Fleck call out Lincoln Riley?
You are Locked On Trojans, your daily podcast on the USC Trojans, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Fight on, everyone. I'm your host, Mark Hulkin, and thank you for making Locked On USC part of the Locked On Network, your first listen every day. Whether you're watching the show on YouTube, wherever you want to download this podcast, this show is always free. And this show always appreciates your support. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. So after the game, head coaches talk to the media. And, I'm over there in the USC press conference checking out what Lincoln Riley has to say. So I went ahead and I did some reading. And I wanted to see what Minnesota's head coach, PJ Fleck, what he had to say about their win against USC. Well, it looked like the way PJ Fleck kind of described it, at least my interpretation of this, PJ Fleck and Coach Riley, they had a staring contest for 60 minutes. And Lincoln Riley was the first to blink. That's why they lost the game. This is a quote from PJ Fleck. Tell me what you think about this. I mean, he's referring to USC, ran the ball pretty well. But if they were going to beat us, they were going to have to beat us on the ground. You could just tell they were running the ball, but they still wanted to throw the ball. End quote. This is what I was talking about after the other night's game. Okay, my instant reaction show. Go check it out when you're done watching this episode. You get my real visceral response after a win or a loss. Typically, after the losses, much more visceral, much more emotional. Anyways, remember, USC was averaging 6.2 yards per carry. Woody Marks finished the game with 134 yards running. So that comment from PJ Fleck, I think it really illustrates that Minnesota knew USC would never fully commit to the running game. They wouldn't keep the ball on the ground. And I think it was Coach Fleck kind of understood how this was going to play out when Quentin Joyner, the freshman, the second-year player, I apologize, he rushed for 15 yards on two carries. That was on the opening drive of the game. And then USC threw it twice. They gained a total of -1 yard. And they were forced to take that long field goal attempt by Michael Lance. I believe that's the one he pushed 47 yards to the right. Look, it already doesn't take a lot right now to distract Coach Riley's attention to detail. That's not a negative, but as a head coach, as a young head coach, and you're trying to, kind of change your stripes, you're implementing a new defense, you're trying to have your hands in everybody's thing. It might be time for Coach Riley to give up play calling duties. That might be the next step in his own development. I'm not going to talk about that on this episode. We'll talk about that on another episode, I'm sure. But again, when you're paying attention to so many details, it's easy to get distracted and forget what you should be focused on at that moment. So if Minnesota's head coach, who has really good trained eyes, if you're going to be a head coach at this level, you're probably good at something, right? It's not, well, I know somebody and they got me the job type of situation. So you start to recognize predictable play calling. Opposing defenses know Lincoln Riley wants to pass the ball first. That's who he is. So, Fleck was kind of pretty much daring Coach Riley. Stay disciplined. Run the ball. I'm daring you. Run the ball. That's what you're going to need to do if you're going to beat us. And Coach Riley wasn't able to do that. He got away from it. He understood that no matter what the situation was, Coach Riley is always going to fall back to what he feels comfortable doing, and that's calling passing plays, because that's who he is. I mean, heaven forbid, one of Coach Riley's teams, they win a game the old-fashioned way, on the strength of defense, which he actually now has one, so he can make that claim, and just good old-fashioned ground and pound. Run the ball, burn clock, make the other team that's not a good passing team beat you through the air. And again, because USC's offensive line is, and I'm saying struggling lightly with their pass protection, I guess some people would say, you know what? Coach Riley allowed himself to be outcoached. Getting Miller Moss, opposing defenses getting to Miller Moss, that's the opposing defense's game plan. They have that advantage because they understand Lincoln Riley likes to pass first. That you kind of game plan for that. This is what else PJ Fleck said when you're having to defend USC's passing game. Quote, get to the quarterback, condense the pocket, put depth on the defense, mix up different bond and bail techniques where they didn't know if we were on, in press defense or off. Throw in some catch technique. I thought we covered really well. It was tight coverage. We were knocking the ball out. We were in their hip. And even if they were going to make a catch, it was going to be in traffic. The reason why he was able to say that, the reason why they were able to play tight coverage is because as the game wore on, Miller Moss was wearing down because he was being chased around. He was working harder than he needed to be. Nothing came easy with USC's passing game. Nothing. And so if I can recognize that, I guarantee you a really good head coach, whether or not you consider PJ Fleck a good head coach, doesn't matter. Good coaches are going to recognize. He knew that his secondary did not have to count to 3 Mississippis. When they're in coverage, they don't have to count that long because SC's O-line can't protect for that long. That's the issue. Think about this. In the game, Moss did not complete a pass of more than 12 yards. And it was late in the second quarter, maybe 3 minutes left, something around there, 3.5 minutes. It was an 18-yard completion, but a lot of it was yak after the catch. Got the ball to Mekhi Lemon, and that was their longest pass play of the game. In the second quarter, an 18-yard pass to Mekhi Lemon. And I'm going to say this again. No, I'm not going to say that. I'm saying this now to kind of drive the point home that it's time to let Zachariah Branch watch from the sideline. I'm not saying bench him. I'm saying I think some of his game reps need to go to Mekhi, especially if he's healthy. Lemon just needs to see more targets go his way in the game. And then, you want to also give credit to Minnesota's players. They were making plays. Give some credit where credit's due. They knew the situation. They were playing at home. They took advantage of what USC was giving them on offense. And don't forget, on paper, coming into the game, they had the number 1 pass defense. This was supposed to be their big test. It could have been a bigger test if USC stuck with the run game. But again, Lincoln Riley blinked. He wouldn't, I don't know. Quote, and this is again PJ Fleck speaking. I think what got us going in the second half, I think we opened 3 drives with screens. Okay. So now he's flipping the script. USC's defense played pretty darn well, but they had some breakdowns in the game, specifically in the second half. He said USC's defense is very difficult to defense. USC's defense is a very difficult defense to game plan. You have no idea what you're going to see at the beginning of the game, in the middle of the game, and definitely when he makes adjustments in the second half. But our guys kept their composure and their poise, played really hard, used their fundamentals and technique. So how can we generate explosive plays to start drives? This is what Fleck said. How can we be able to keep them covering from sideline to sideline? USC makes you cover sideline to sideline, but we're built a little different because USC, have athletes all over the place in space, but we were able to use the whole field, sideline to sideline and vertical. Minnesota had just 4 drives on offense in the second half. And they only threw on the first play on all 4 of them. That was it. 2 were screen passes that went for a combined 47 yards. In fact, to put this whole thing into context, 44%, 75 yards of Minnesota's total 169 passing yards for the game came on those 4 first down plays. And that all happened in the second half. I love what Coach Riley has done with the defense. That side of the ball, they have gotten so much better. And obviously the lion's share of that gratitude needs to be extended to defensive coordinator Antonlynn. But Coach Riley cannot let the opposing, the opposition dictate how a game is going to finish, how it's going to end. And he let that happen when he couldn't or wouldn't stay with the run game. Let me give you this trend to kind of drive this home. Since Lincoln Riley took over in 2022, USC has averaged 36, almost 37 passing attempts per game versus almost 34 rushing attempts. That was in 2022. Last year in 2023, USC averaged 35.5 passing attempts per game versus only 27.8, almost 28 rushing attempts per game. So the gap is getting bigger now. You've gone from a +3 passing to almost a +8 passing in 1 year. And so far this year, USC is averaging 42 passing attempts per game versus 29 on the ground. The gap doubled from last year to this year. 13.4. They're averaging 13 more passes per game. How's that happening? What is causing USC's offense to be in these situations? We know, I think, a big part of the answer, offensive line. So, are the Trojans 2 plays away from being 5-0, as Lincoln Riley likes to talk about after the game? Because his last loss, it cost them their number 11 ranking. They're now unranked. Apparently, USC's loss to Minnesota on the road was worse than Alabama's loss on the road to Vanderbilt. Tennessee's loss on the road to Arkansas. Missouri's loss on the road to Texas A&M. All those guys are still ranked. USC, they took a big tumble. All right, in the next segment, as you can see on the rundown here, I mentioned Lincoln Riley said teams 2 plays away from being 5-0. Different narrative. Are they really? When you're hiring for your small business, you want to have as many top-tier candidates as possible to interview. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has all the tools, everything you need to find the right professionals for your team faster, and LinkedIn does it for free. LinkedIn isn't just another job board. LinkedIn has a vast network of more than 1 billion, that's with a B, professionals, which is going to make it the best place for you to hire your next person. Hiring is easy when you have that many quality candidates. So easy, in fact, that 86% of small businesses, they get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. LinkedIn knows that small businesses, you don't have a lot of time, you're wearing a lot of hats, so you don't have all the resources you need. Thankfully, with LinkedIn, the process is intuitive, quick, and easy. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnCollege. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnCollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, so as I mentioned before we ended that first segment, Coach Riley says, "Hey, the team, we're 2 plays away from being 5-0 right now. The team is 3-2 overall." On a very macro level, yes, USC is 2 plays away from being part of a completely different conversation. Make one of a few key tackles against Michigan, they more than likely win that game. Don't get homered by the big conference officiating again. They probably have a better chance of winning that game against Minnesota. I'm still waiting to see an angle of the instant replay review that overturns USC's 4th and goal stand. I'm still waiting to see it. I've searched, can't find it. So again, USC gets the ball back, game's still tied. Who knows what happens? Who knows what happens? I know that USC would have had a little bit more time on the clock, and obviously Michael Lance has the leg to kick, long field goals. Now, on a micro level, there are, I won't say there's a ton, but there's still some issues that need to be addressed. Quite a few. I think that's fair. Following the game, this is what Coach Riley said. Quote, "Well, we averaged 7 yards per carry, and honestly, I felt like offensively, it's kind of strange looking at the scoreboard, but I thought our guys played a really good game up front. We gave up a couple of pressures in untimely moments, but we took some steps. We controlled the ball a lot. We ran the ball extremely well. We just didn't make enough plays to win." I'm going to talk about the offensive line in the next segment, and we can spend all day dogging on those guys and Coach Henson for the job he's done with that group. But how much of it is recruiting? And how much of it was what was left in the cupboard when they arrived? Excuse me. Obviously, some of the problems could have been solved had they handled the transfer portal better. Again, I'm going to focus on the offensive line in the next segment. But if we're talking about being a couple plays away from being 5-0, we also have to talk about 2 plays that led to 1 loss, and it's been an issue except for 1 game, Utah State. Again, let me just remind you what Coach Riley said after this game. Quote, "A couple of pressures in untimely moments." It's an interesting way of trying to put a positive spin on it. Just in this game alone against Minnesota, 2 plays contributed to the Gophers winning. One was a pressure on Miller Moss that led to a interception, and another led to that intentional grounded call. That was a big drive that USC was on. They're driving to score points. One thing a team cannot do in games, and especially on the road, is turn the ball over. USC had 3. The last one, that interception at the end of the game, no risk it, no biscuit. It wasn't the best read, but 15 seconds, you got 2 plays, you got to take your shots. Lincoln Riley, he reminded everybody, all 3 of the turnovers were in the plus territory when we had good drives happening. Those are times, especially when you've got a good kicker like we do, those are points every single time when you get over there. 3 drives ended in plus territory. In a game like this where there weren't many possessions, it was massive. So USC had drives of 49 yards, 61 yards, 47 yards before each of the turnovers. So no, USC was not 2 plays away from being 5-0. And remember, they couldn't go for the field goal on that third and final drive because of the 4th and goal overturn on the other end of the field. They needed a touchdown. So I just named 5 plays on Saturday. 5 plays alone that kept USC from winning. Again, I get the positive spin. That's what coaches are supposed to do. Accentuate the positive. Keep the guys feeling good about their prospects, playing their next game, building on what they did well, and fixing what they need to fix. Challenge for Lincoln Riley is he hasn't been able to do that. Did you know that in his last 12 games as USC's head coach, he has the same record as these guys? Sonny Dykes, TCU, Hugh Freeze, Auburn, Billy Napier, Florida, Sam Pittman, Arkansas, Lincoln Riley. All 5 of these coaches have the same 5-7 record in their last 12 games. Whoa. And then what if I told you that Clay Helton and Lincoln Riley have the same record at the same point of their USC tenures? Do the same amount of games. Coach Riley and Coach Helton, same identical record. I think 23-10, something like that. Ooh, yikes. I'm not saying Coach Riley is on the hot seat or that he should be. But should he be? He's what? 5 games into year 3? Can you believe it? We've already played 5 games. Crazy how time flies. I think that how the rest of the season finishes is going to determine, what seat Coach Riley is sitting in. But again, the defense is getting better. Much better. They got to clean up some stuff. They can't be allowing those explosive plays, especially in the run game. But they're so much better than they were last year and the year before. It's not even funny. However, on the other side of the ball, the offense, it seems to be regressing. And I don't think changing quarterbacks fixes the problem. I know everybody wants to give Jaden Mayava the opportunity. I'm not saying he can't handle the opportunity, but it's a Band-Aid. It's masking the problem of the offensive line. They run block great. They don't pass protect very well at all. So we saw what happened last year when you had Caleb Williams, who could make something happen when the play or the pocket broke down. They finished 8-5 last year. Do we want to go down that road again? I don't. When was the last time you went to any live event, concert, comedy show, USC football game? You got tickets to the game this weekend against Penn State? Well, if you don't, it's sold out. Game Time has this new feature called Game Time Picks. It's going to make getting tickets for any of your favorite live events really super easy. Game Time Picks filters out all the fluff. It's only going to show you these incredible deals on great seats, so you're not wasting your time looking at thousands of different opportunities. And check this out. My favorite feature of Game Time, they give you this, it's called, I don't know what the exact term is, but you can zoom in and you can see your seat before you check out. It'll give you a virtual idea of, hey, this is what you're going to see when you pay for this ticket. So what are you worried about, right? Spending too much? Don't worry. With the Game Time guarantee, you always get the best price. In fact, if you find tickets in the same section and row for less, Game Time's going to credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code Locked On for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code Locked On for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. All right. Coach Josh Henson. I know the easy answer for the fans is fire him, scapegoat him, make him the next Alex Grinch. And I understand where they're coming from. I understand their argument. Doesn't necessarily mean I agree with it. Recruiting hasn't been elite. It's been solid. It hasn't been elite. There's no 5 stars in there. Yeah. Again, I think it's been solid. They brought in 10 guys in the last 2 classes, the class of 2023 and 2024, 10 guys combined. You want to recruit high school offensive linemen, develop them, have them ready. And just to remind everybody, they didn't have a whole lot of time to do anything with the 2022 recruiting class. So you take all that, all that minutia into consideration. And then you also consider that, their moves in the transfer portal have been more miss than hit. I think the most successful guy that they've gotten, it's your starting left guard, Emmanuel Prignon. So if we're going to point at the bad, which that's everyone's focused on right now, we should probably also acknowledge, the positives. So let's start with, well, I don't know. I know this isn't a great follow-up. Let's start with the offensive line. Let me back up. All right. The biggest issue right now is at both tackle spots. On the right side, you've got Mason Murphy. He's been struggling. He's been inconsistent. There's no other way to say it. He's had every opportunity. He's been at USC the longest, save for Jonah Monheim. Excuse me. Is it time to make the switch to Tobias Raymond at right tackle? Mason struggled massively against Michigan. And then he struggled again against Minnesota. Not as much, but he still struggled. He can't handle those speed guys. And what happens is when the speed guys get around over the top of Mason, Miller has to step up, and now the pocket gets condensed. It shrinks up on him. And what's compounding it, making it worse, is USC's highest rated offensive lineman that they've recruited, Elijah Page. He's in his second year. He's your starter at left tackle in his second year. He hasn't played very well. He's actually struggled more than Mason Murphy. The problem is you've got no depth behind him, or what depth you do have, it's true freshmen. And those guys might have the physical size. Talk about it all the time. They look the part, but they're not ready to play. They weren't as highly rated as Elijah Page coming out of high school. And Elijah is struggling. Again, he's in his second year of the program, playing the most important position on the offensive line after center, the blind side. So you've got both tackles struggling. You've had consistency issues at right guard. Constantly rotating Alani Noah and Amos Talalele. Well, against Minnesota, there was no rotation. Noah played the entire game at right guard. In fact, they didn't rotate anybody in on the offensive line. So what's next? What can you do right now? You're not firing Coach Henson mid-season. It's not happening. It's just not happening. So what's your next suggestion? Well, one solution could possibly be moving Jonah back to left tackle, putting Killian O'Connor at center, Gino Quinones at right guard. Will that stabilize the O-line? Are you going to ask Jonah to move back to the left tackle spot after you essentially you're paying him to play center this year? He could have gone to the NFL last year in the draft. Look, Penn State's in town this weekend, and USC, they got to get this figured out, or things are going to get really ugly. Jaden Mayaba might be able to make things happen with his legs, but that's not fixing the problem. As I mentioned, the offensive line struggled last year with Caleb Williams. So again, is this USC's best option on the offensive line? Left to right. Jonah at left tackle, Prignon left guard, Killian O'Connor at center, Gino Quinones right guard, and if you're going to make the switch to Tobias Raymond, right tackle. Keep in mind, though, if you bench the veteran, Mason Murphy, now, you're locked in. I think you've got to ride the wave going forward. You just got to say, hey, we're going to sink or swim with Tobias. Because once you put Mason Murphy on the bench, I don't think it's fair to him to say, all right, we're going to give this guy a couple games to see what he can do and say, then we'll bring it back. Doesn't work that way. Doesn't work that way. So what's the answer? Hit me up. You know where to find me. You're watching this on YouTube. Become a subscriber. Keep the show growing. Smash that thumbs up. Click that bell notification well, you don't miss an episode. I'll be back again with another episode tomorrow. So until then, everyone, you know what to do.